Welcome to Behind the Investigation with Atlanta News First Investigates. I'm Chief Investigator Brendan Keefe, and I'm joined by investigative reporter Sierra Cummings. Hi, Sierra.
Hi, I'm happy to be here.
Today we're talking about your ongoing investigative series, Stolen Sobriety. These are cases where parents are essentially accused of being on drugs, even if they're clean, even if they've used drugs in the past, but essentially they test clean now with a more advanced test. But the test that the state allows or the state uses shows somehow they're still on drugs and they don't get their kids back. But this one has a happy ending.
It does have a happy ending, hence the name Stolen Sobriety you just explained. This is a mom, Driana, who admits to having a drug addiction, and her kids were taken from her in order to get her kids back. She agreed to these random drug screens over the past 3 years. She says she's been sober, but when she gets drug screened by the state, she has failed some of those tests. Once we start reporting on this story, we encouraged her and many of our viewers, if you are saying you're sober, get independent drug screens. So for the last year, she's been getting independent drug screens, and she was able to reunite with her children. Here's Driana's story. Their long walk into this Roswell Park, not nearly as long as the journey for this family.
Don't give up until the miracle happens.
The miracle, Driana Hefner says, happened Wednesday when a judge ruled in her favor, ordering to close the child welfare case against Driana, reuniting the mom and her daughters, who've been in foster care for 3 years.
I've just worked really hard for this, so it was overwhelming, honestly. Overwhelming in a good way, but I've just worked so hard for this. This is like all the efforts that I've put into this, especially within the past year and a half. Now it's finally like the end of it, and we get to be whole and together again.
Finally, because for so long, drugs left her family broken. She admits to past addiction, which led to arrest and intervention from the Division of Family and Children's Services, DFACS. Her kids placed with the foster family. To get them back, Driana agreed to DFACS random drug screens. When we first met the mom back in 2024, she'd been sober for about 3 years. But some of her drug screens did not show that. Hair follicle drug tests from DFACS subcontracted labs show multiple times she tested positive for drugs. So Driana says caseworkers believed she was still on drugs.
You want Mommy to come with you?
She recalls DFACS lawyers even discussing possible termination of her parental rights. With few people on her side, Driana says she only remained strong because of her own mother's support.
It felt good because a lot of people looked at me like, well, these drug tests are saying this. And people would tell my mom, like, well, the drug test is saying this. And my mom was like, I know my daughter is not using.
A year-long Atlanta News First investigation uncovered a history of concerns and formal complaints of false positives from Georgia labs. We found some labs contracted to do drug screens on behalf of DFACS don't typically perform a specialized drug test called DL-isomer. The test distinguishes between legal drugs like medicine versus illicit drugs. Although not required by the state, it could help minimize claims of false positives. So, at the advice of an attorney, and after watching our previous investigation, Driana began to get independent drug screens too. Every time DFACS tested her, she went to a third-party lab as well.
They're not cheap. They're expensive. I've come out of pocket money that I did not have just to prove my innocence.
Yeah.
So,
would you say over the last few years you've spent hundreds and hundreds to do it?
Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely. Probably about $1,000.
But a process that proved priceless.
You want me to go on the slide with you?
For these very moments. Armed with repeated negative drug screens from independent labs, Driana was able to fight in court and win custody of her kids.
I was upset at the system, really, because I knew that I was sober and they were trying to tell me that I wasn't, and I had to jump through hoops and they already make you do a lot, and I was doing all of that, but then I had to do even more to prove that I was sober, and it took longer, but I'm where I'm at now.
We are so happy for Driana and her daughters, who we are not naming, but this is one of those positive stories we were excited to share. We did reach out to DFACS for a comment. They did not get back to us, but their practice is to not comment on these types of cases. They previously told us, though, they are open to doing an audit on these drug screen issues because, as we've mentioned, when these families go out to get the independent drug screens from accredited labs like the LabCorps, Quest Diagnostics, when they get those drug screens, it shows that they are negative for drugs, that they are sober, and they've had a few issues with the state drug screens, which say they are positive for drugs. So we're interested to see where the state stands with this audit. I reached out even a couple days ago, and it doesn't seem to be an indication that an audit has started.
Well, and of course, one of the goals, I think, of the stories or the series of stories is to hold the powerful accountable, obviously, hold the powerful accountable, and then hopefully, bring about change. But waiting for that, you have brought about change because she would not have gotten this independent drug test unless you suggested it to her. And you've done this on multiple individual instances. And then the courts have recognized in many of these cases those independent results and have returned the children to the parent who has earned that right back.
Yeah, that's an important point to make because at the time we met Driana last year in 2024, she said she had already been sober for nearly 3 years. And it wasn't until the last year after we met her that she started to do those repeated independent drug screens because she had saw our stories, had talked to us. We met her and told her, hey, this seems to be the avenue that parents take when they are adamant that they are sober. And you got to prove it. I mean, to the state's point, like if they have a test that's saying one thing, they're going to go off of those results. So you really have to be armed with countering information. And that's exactly what she's done for the last year. And unfortunately, she's spent money out of
I was just
pocket.
going to say, this isn't cheap.
It's not cheap. And so judges have brought up that inherent fundamental unfairness because they're having to spend money out of pocket. And so it matters if, can you afford to prove your innocence? And these families say we shouldn't have to go through that, but yet here they are.
Yeah, I mean, they have to prove a negative too, quite literally. And they have to prove a negative drug test. And the burden is on them. Why shouldn't the burden be on the state to prove you are on drugs instead of on the parent to prove they aren't?
Mm-hmm. It's really frustrating. And, this is one of those series that we have to vet the people that you see in these stories because we know, I mean, my addiction has touched my family and we know a part of recovery is a relapse. So we're not saying that these people are perfect and they've never relapsed in their entire lives and we should just trust everyone who's saying they're sober. What we're saying is there should be a process where a family member should be able to take a reliable test, and these tests should actually be used as just a tool and not the deciding factor on whether a child gets to go home or has to remain in state care.
Well, and the other thing is, because this is behind the investigation, we rarely do stories on one unusual incident. We often do stories on systemic and institutional failures because we can get those fixed. Your stories have resulted in new laws. Your stories have resulted in policy changes that have made our communities better and safer places in which to live. This appears to be a similar case where you've stayed on the story and you continue to stay on the story because the institutional and systemic failure persists. Is that fair?
That is absolutely fair to say. In fact, we plan to introduce our audience to another family in the coming weeks here. And this mom has never been on drugs. She says she takes certain medication for her ADD. And it's just so interesting the way her story was introduced to us. And in that story, we're going to figure out what the state is doing in response to all of these examples we've given. But to your point, they're not just one-offs. We feel that this is a systemic issue. We know at this time it doesn't seem to be some audit because we haven't gotten the state to confirm an audit exists. They said they were interested in it, but we do know
know they've at least sent out a memo to contractors about adhering to federal guidelines and guidance when it comes to drug screens. So, yeah, absolutely fair to say that we believe this is a systemic issue. We believe we've shown is a systemic issue, and all the people involved in our reporting, from former DFACS director to juvenile judges to advocates, affirm the same, that this is a situation that deserves some urgent resolution.
Investigative reporter Sierra Cummings, great job as always. If you'd like to see Sierra's stories, you can go to atlantanewsfirst.com, click on the Investigates page, and what you'll see when you get there is a little tab for Stolen Sobriety. You can watch the whole series of Stolen Sobriety stories. This is out now well into year 2 on this series. Is that correct?
Yes, Coach.
So, and it looks like there might be a year 3 because you're going to stay on it till you get it fixed. And if you'd like to send us some tips, you can send an email to investigates@atlantanewsfirst.com. You've been watching Behind the Investigation with Atlanta News First Investigates. You can also listen to this as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you next time.